If you've thought about fighting types over the last decade and a half, let's say, it's probably been in the context of fighters being among the game's most dangerous threats. You know, they're not just good at dishing out damage, they tend to pulverize the opponent, which is fitting, that's why they're called fighting types. However, it was not always like that, and today we are going to examine the history of where the fighting type has come from, and in examining the changes over the years of why the fighting type went from terrible to, among the scariest in the game, then we will also understand the nuances of why the fighting type is as scary as it is, and that can be of great benefit for anyone looking to wrest the greatest amount of value out of their fighting type. Because fighters are really scary and do often just smash through the opponent through sheer brute force, but sometimes they can also thud and not really get much done. And you might be wondering, well, how can I get the most out of my, +6 choice band close combats if they just keep thudding into ghost types? So, here we will solve that problem, and you will have your +6 choice band close combat triple OHKO your opponent's team. Anyway, we will start with RBY, where all fighting types are bad. Machamp is the best one and the only one we're going to go over, and it is in the PU tier. So, yeah, it's got a great attack stat, of course, and submission does hit Tauros, Snorlax, and Chansey super effectively, who are on every team, as well as things like Cloyster and Rhydon. The problem is that RBY is also dominated by psychic types, and Machamp is just terrible into them. It just thuds, it hopes for body slam paralysis, and yeah, it's not really going to do anything that you couldn't just do with Pokemon like Tauros and Snorlax and Rhydon that are also great physical hitters, but have other much more favorable traits, be it their bulk or their crit rates in the case of Tauros, or their defensive typing in the case of Rhydon. And Rhydon really hits hard with that same attack stat, but Stab Earthquake, and a Stab Rock Slide as well. Whereas Machamp's, and it's also really, really bulky, whereas Snorlax, of course, has a Stab Normal move, one of the most spammable moves in the game, whereas Machamp's Stab is not spammable, not just because it's 80 base power, that's okay, 80 accuracy, not great, first of all, really not great, and also it causes recoil, which is awful, much, much worse than its the physical beaters it's trying to compete with. And also, it is not spammable because it is so hilariously resisted by so many top OU Pokemon. Zam, Starmie, Eggy, even something like Zapdos is going to give it trouble. And forget, if Slowbro shows up, forget it. It's just absolutely useless. And it's not very fast either. So, it's at the same speed as Exeggutor, which isn't bad, but it would be a lot more threatening if it had a good crit rate, which, it doesn't really. And Exeggutor, on the other hand, is much more threatening because it has Psychic Stab. And, of course, tools like Status and Boom. So it's just much more well-equipped to take on the metagame than Machamp. Machamp can't do anything. Can't do anything in OU. Can't do anything in UU, which has, like, Kadabra and stuff. Can't do anything in NU, which has Execute. So, yeah, forget using Machamp at all. Even stupid stuff like either you give up Earthquake and you're walled by, Gengar in OU, or something like, or Haunter and UU. I guess not Wall, because Rock Slide does okay damage, but I mean, the extra hassle is just so silly. Or Nidoking and NU, and you give up Rock Slide, and then you start losing to Moltres, all the way up in OU, actually. And, getting stuff even harder by Zapdos. So yeah, just even beyond those big problems, it even has these stupid little problems. And, without Body Slam, you can't even threaten paralysis on the Psychics. And it's not that bulky, so it's not switching into much at all. It's not that bulky, I mean, it's not frail, but it doesn't have much in the way of resistances. So it's just not good at switching in, and once it does switch in, it doesn't do much damage, and it's just awful. So There are some things you can technically try and do with Machamp in Gen 1, but there's a reason why you never see it in high-level tournament play. So now we go to Gen 2, and Machamp is actually a great OU Pokemon. It still suffers from the fact that its stab is 80% accurate, which is a real heartbreaker, but it has a lot more going for it. First of all, Cross Chop is 100 base power. That's really big. Second of all, it has Curse, which makes it stronger, so this lets it muscle through things like Zapdos a lot more easily. It also has Hidden Power, so with HP Bug, its most common Hidden Power, though Ghost is sometimes... I mean, that's kind of a relic, because Earthquake already smacks Misdreavus pretty hard, and it obviously hits Gengar harder, because Gengar doesn't have Levitate, because there's no abilities in Gen 2. But HP Ghost is sometimes used. It's even used HP Flying for Heracross before. Another fighting type, but we'll get to Hera. But HP Bug is the most common because it slams Exeggutor, obviously. And, of course, it hits Starmie quite hard. And as well as things that are more popular now, like Espeon and Alakazam. But mostly Eggy and Starmie. And mostly Eggy, because one-on-one Machamp can struggle against Starmie. But it's good to be able to hit it. However, in addition to these traits of Machamp's move pool being more rounded, Cross Chop is also much more threatening now that a lot of teams are still stacking fighting weeks in that they've got Lax, and then their spiker is usually Cloyster, and then they've got, for offensive teams, they've got a normal resistant phaser, which is going to be T-Tar, Rhydon, Golem, or Steelix, and they're all weak to Cross Chop, of course. And then you throw in things like Umbreon. And yeah, Cross Chop is going to be threatening a lot of Pokemon on your average team. I skipped over Miltank because it's quite rare, but there's another Pokemon weak to Cross Chop. And just because you're not weak to Cross Chop doesn't mean you don't take heavy damage from it. Oh, I skipped over Blissey as well because Machamp is quite threatening to stall. The most common physical wall, or the premier physical wall, I should say, Skarmory, not resistant to Cross Chop. So it's not exactly a great counter. Cross Chop also has a pretty significant critical hit ratio, so things can get really nasty really, really quickly. Machamp is definitely one of the biggest wall breakers in Gen 2. It even can throw on things like Fire Blast to have an even easier time against Skarm while instantly threatening Fortress, still chunking Eggy. There's a lot of cool things Machamp can do. I mean, some players have messed around with Light Screen, which I think is really cool. We've seen Encore very, very rarely, but it does have its merits in that it lets you switch into Snorlax more. And what's that last thing? Oh, yeah, some players use Protect to get more lefties recovery, so you can go one-on-one against things like Zapdos more easily. So yeah, Snorlax. Machamp is really cool. Obviously, beating the tar out of Snorlax and Tar is amazing. And the problem Machamp has is that it's not much in the way of a defensive Pokemon, because it doesn't have too much in the way of super valuable resist, and it's not that bulky. The best switching opportunity it has is T-Tar, which is not that common, but it can still find its way in, especially, and this is characteristic of fighting types as a whole. Not the best defensively, usually, but when you manage to get them on the field, they bring the pain. It's really, really hard. So if you double switch into that Snorlax and you've sufficiently crippled the opposing Zapdos through paralysis or forcing it to rest or whatever, or maybe you've removed it outright by blowing it up with your Exeggutor, then yeah, Machamp is going to start really it puts immediate pressure on the opposing team like few other Pokemon in GSC are capable of, because of that huge attack stat and the boosting option and the strong stab with good type coverage. So it's a lot of good stuff going for it. Oh, Protect is also great because it guards against explosions, which it's not uncommon to see Cloyster check Machamp by blowing up on it, so which does a ton of damage even after Curse. So yeah. And you're wondering, well, yeah, HP Bug is great and all. Oh, EQ is also good for Nidoking. That's important. And Machamp can opt out of running HP Bug, and you're wondering, yeah, that's a lot of non-HP Bug you're mentioning there. You got EQ, which is crucial. You've got, it also hits Raikou harder, which is significant. You got your stuff like Light Screen and Protect. It's like, how do you justify breaking past the... how do you justify dropping those when the problem in Gen 1 was its complete helplessness against Psychics? Now you have that tool and you want to get rid of it? Well, Gen 2 introduced another tool that has wound up being one of fighting types' biggest allies over multiple generations. Not just spikes, of course, though that does help, but it also hurts Machamp. No, I'm talking about Pursuit, which seems almost tailor-made to support fighting types. Because what are two of the three types that resist? What are the three types that resist flyers? Not flyers. That resist fighting, right? You got flying, obviously, but then you've also got psychic and ghost. And Pursuit is specifically designed to forcibly remove psychics and ghosts. So with Machamp potentially supported, or usually by T-Tar, sometimes by Umbreon, sometimes even Houndoom, it's pretty cool, then you can remove things like Eggy and Missy, and you don't need to hit them super effectively as much. Or, you can help it out against Gengar. Not that Gengar is great against Machamp to begin with, but the Eggy thing is particularly relevant. And that you can... And this is going to be a trend for fighting types over the generations. That's like, yeah, I could pack coverage on my fighter for so-and-so Pursuit weak or so-and-so Dark weak Pokemon, or I could just partner it with Pursuit and remove that Pokemon forcibly and then free up my fighting type to be even more dangerous. This was one of the most dangerous, consistent combinations for the generations when Pursuit was in the game. So, and it started here in Gen 2 with Machamp. So, Machamp is, of course, not the only fighter in Gen 2. We mentioned Heracross earlier, but the problem in Gen 2 is that Machamp is really the exception in terms of fighting types being threatening because of Cross Chop, and Fighting Stab in Gen 2 is still, or fighting moves rather, are still very rare. There's not even Brick Break or anything. Heracross has options for Fighting Stab or HP Fighting, which, yeah, okay. No. And some players have tried to use Reversal on it, which, I mean, it's a gimmick. It's not a very good one either. And, yeah, okay, it does amazing damage once you get to 1 HP, but first of all, you hope spikes aren't up. Second of all, you get outsped by a lot. Heracross isn't very fast, and there's no Salig Berry or anything, so it's just, yeah. When you use Heracross, you're not using it for Fighting Stab. You're using it because of its unique defensive profile that helps against things like Gengar and Machamp and Nidoking, because that bug typing in conjunction with fighting lets you do things like resist EQ without... you resist Earthquake and Cross Chop without being weak to Rock Slide. That's really big. Oh, it helps it check Marowak as well, actually. Marowak sometimes even runs HP Flying for Hera, while also hitting Eggy. Yeah, so you check, it's Exeggutor-like in that it answers EQ without being weak to Rock Slide, but unlike Eggy, it's not going to be weak to, or quadruple weak to HP Bug. That's kind of big, and it also is not weak to Ice, or Electric for that matter, which lets it answer Earthquake from Nidoking. So, and Nidoking, that type coverage on Nidoking, EQ and Ice Beam Thunder, makes it very difficult for a lot of teams to handle safely, and Heracross is one of the few things that stuffs that coverage. With Seismic Toss, Heracross also winds up being quite a good check to Curse Steelix. Because it takes boosted EQs quite nicely and S-tosses it down, and if it gets blown up on, then at least its teammate Skarm or Zapdos wasn't getting worn down. Heracross has been part of some very nice defensive cores. Hera Raikou, Hera Skarmory. It's made for some good teams over the years. Its main problems are Skarmory and Zapdos. And Skarm, you actually turn that to your advantage because you Seismic Toss Skarm a bunch, and then it forces a rest, and then you take advantage of that with something like a Drum Snorlax, most historically. Whereas Zapdos is a little more frustrating because it rest talks and... yeah. So the other way that you can use Heracross is by running Curse over S-Toss, and the sweep potential is nice. In particular, you become a lot more threatening for something like a Snorlax. The problem is that you need something to remove Skarmory, otherwise you're just completely worthless. So the most common way to do this is to run a Curse Boom Snorlax to remove the opponent's Skarm and then go nuts with Curse Hera. But you also have dumb problems like you get completely ruined by Curse Steelix You are a lot less effective against even something like Machamp. So, yeah, Hera really likes Seismic Toss for its defensive duties. But, both sets have their upsides, obviously. So, that's pretty much fighting in Gen 2. I mean, you still have, they're very threatening, but it's balanced out by their weaknesses. To Zapdos, which is just crazy to deal with. And the plethora of good fighting resists in the tier. Now, we move on to Gen 3. And here are some big changes. First of all, you've got actual fighting stab now. Several, actually. Heracross got an insane boost in general. We've still got Machamp, which is good because of its ability, Guts. And it also doesn't have to boost with Curse now. You have Bulk Up. So fighting types are a lot more threatening in Gen 3, and there's more of them, too. You got Breloom, and you've got Blaziken. Blaziken is not here. I was looking at Charizard. And you've also got Medicham. And I think I'm overlooking one that gets used in OU once in a while. They're not ordered in by how much they're used, by the way. It's just an order of... Oh, Hariyama. Well, Hariyama is its own beast. But Hariyama is, in fact, a beast. So I think that's more or less all the big fighters that get used in OU anyway. Yeah, the Hitmon trio doesn't get used in OU, and neither does Primeape. Yeah, so these are the fighters that get used in OU. And if I'm forgetting something, I'm very sorry. I'll check through like NU and stuff real quick. But yeah, okay, that's pretty much everything. Okay, so here are the boosts that fighters get in Gen 3. You got actual fighting stab. Brick Break, this is amazing. 75 power in Gen 3, hey, that's good. And you have the screen breaking benefit, which is cool. But you've also got Focus Punch. Now, Focus Punch is used most commonly in Advanced on non-fighting types. And in fact, the aspect of fighting coverage is often a big part of making other Pokemon more threatening, like T-Tar or Salamence or Snorlax. Even CB Metagross, which you would think doesn't need it because of the redundancies in its coverage with Meteor Mash and EQ, sometimes still finds use for Brick Break. But, yeah, I don't want to get too sidetracked by that because we're trying to focus on the fighting types themselves. So, we got big actual stab here. And Advance is like a GSC. It's like GSC, but it's also like the newer gens. Being like GSC in that its level of offensive power is not off the charts on average. You got all these Pokemon using hidden power for stab and stuff. But on the other hand, you do have these Pokemon that offer bursts of enormous damage. Now, and these Pokemon that do so are usually balanced out, in the case of the fighting types, by their immense frailty. And they're generally low speed, and even something like Metagross, which packs a lot of power, is balanced out similarly because Meteor Mash doesn't have the best offensive coverage and it's slow. And but of course, Metagross is one of the best Pokemon in the game for a reason. But fighting types offer just huge power. In the case of Medicham, it's pure power, but they're balanced out by their offensive by their defensive flaws. So, but let's focus before we focus on the defensive flaws, which we already kind of know. They're not that fast and they're frail and they got a lot of weaknesses, common stuff. Psychic and flying and Dugtrio and stuff like that. But let's look at the power. We got Brick Break, we got Focus Punch, we got huge attack stats across the board. 130, 125, if I remember. Yeah, 125, 130, 120. I don't know what Medicham's is like effectively with pure power, but it's bigger than everyone else, and 120. So these are huge attack stats, and with huge stabs. Machamp and Yama have Cross Chop. These other, Heracross can, these others can all run Focus Punch, and then like other moves like Brick Break for one-on-ones. Breloom and Blaziken can run Sky Uppercut. So generally they're hitting hard. They've also got better boosting options. You got Bulk Up, you got Swords Dance for Breloom, Blaziken feasibly. And even for those that don't boost, then you can just go immediate power with Choice Band, which does insane stuff. Also, all these abilities are crucial. You got Guts on several of these Pokemon, so that statusing them, yeah, forget it. Most physical attackers you burn and they're ruined. With these, you make them stronger. I mean, they get worn down, and we'll get to the double-edged sword that is Sandstorm soon. But Guts makes them scarier. Heracross Swarm is more in relation to Megahorn, but yeah, it's also a big threatening fighting type. Breloom doesn't use Effect Spore as much, but it can be crucial. Blaziken's got Blaze, a la Swarm. Medicham is self-explanatory, and Hariyama can go both defensive and offensive, whether Thick Fat or Guts. So there's a lot of potential power being thrown around. Heracross finally gets Rock Slide, so it can actually threaten flying types a lot more efficiently. And yeah, when you've got... Another reason why these fighting types are so threatening is that the common physical walls are not resistant to fighting. You got Skarmory again, and then you've got Bulky Waters, neither of which are fighting resistant. Even something like Metagross, yeah, great defense stat, not taking fighting moves particularly great. I mean, okay, it takes Brick Breaks well, but it's not going to want to switch into a big smack from a Focus Punch, especially not a choice-banded one. So the potential for power is huge. It's also easier than ever to get these Pokemon in with Baton Pass Zapdos, which is famously one of their best partners because BP Zapdos tends to draw in slow, fighting-weak Pokemon like T-Tar, Blissey, Snorlax, Regice. You just BP out on the switch, and now your fighting type is in for free. They've also got their own little resistances. Being a fighting type is particularly nice in the generation completely dominated by Tyranitar. And that's that's a point of entry for a lot of them. I mean, it's not ironclad. Breloom in particular has to watch out for Ice Beam and Focus Punch. Or not Focus Punch, sorry, Fire Blast, whereas Blaziken struggles to switch into non-special Tar just in general. But, and Medicham is quite frail as well. But, Hariyama famously comes in on T-Tar with Delight and starts spamming Knockoff or whatever it wants to do. So, yeah, they get it on these forced special walls, and that's what really makes them... they weren't really popular when Advance was in the current gen because of their lack of defensive use. And back when Advance was the current gen, then it was a lot more used to a GSC style of play, where if you were going to use an offensive Pokemon, it better pull its weight as well. You want offensive, defensive Pokemon, so you're not just playing 5-6 for a lot of the game and then waiting for your big hitter to come in and start cleaning everything up, because the power level just isn't high enough to warrant that kind of play on average. And then once in Advance, it was starting, people started realizing, hey, these fighting types can potentially pull their weight just through sheer damage. Then they started getting experimented with more. It's like, okay, yeah, cool. We can justify them more, and we can find defensive use for them. Like Breloom even has Mach Punch to check things like DD Tar. So, and of course, Spore takes a Pokemon out of the game in general, which is just enormous. And it could do all sorts of things like Stun Spore, Salamence switch-ins. I mean, yeah, you got more and more fighting type weak points, but they can all be dealt with somehow. For example, the fact that a lot of fighting resists are flyer. I mean, you've got the pursuit thing even more so now, because fighting types are not just hitting harder because they have better moves and better coverage and more boosting options, but also because in Gen 3, Pokemon don't have their EVs maxed out automatically like in the first two gens. So on average, damage is higher, which of course makes them frailer, but also makes their hits sting more. So even if you hit like a Zapdos with a Focus Punch, in Gen 2 it would have bounced off. In Gen 3, it's going to leave a mark, especially with another tool that famously hinders the longevity of Pokemon, which is Sandstorm. Now, the fighters themselves don't love that Sandstorm prevents them, essentially makes them even frailer than they already are, but it's generally in their favor, because when you're using fighters... unless you're using a bulky Hariyama. But when you're using fighters, you do not want a long, drawn-out game. You want it fast. You want to be dishing out as much damage as you possibly can in the shortest amount of time possible. And Sandstorm helps with that, enormously. You switch Salamence into a Focus Punch, and yeah, Intimidate and Resist and whatever, but that damage is going to stick, and that's going to be significant later. So Sandstorm is really, really big. And you generally don't fit the fighters in with spikes in this gen, though, with like more Pokemon gaining Levitate and stuff, because you can't EQ Gengar anymore, for example. But with the checks being things like Levitate Gengar and Salamence and Zapdos, then you are not going to need the extra push from spikes, as opposed to something with more grounded checks like a DD Tar or an Arrow or something. And to bring it back to the Pursuit thing, then Pursuit will chunk a lot of would-be checks like Celebi and Gengar a lot harder now than in Gen 2, especially with the addition of Natures, which pushes stats to higher levels than they were before. So, for example, in Gen 2, then Heracross's max attack stat was 348, and now you add Nature. Well, now it gets one stat higher to 349, even without a boosting Nature. But now with Adamant, you go all the way up to 383. So just generally more damage, and fighting types in Gen 3 are the best example of being used more or less for their damage capabilities. Like, yeah, you've got your support stuff, like Breloom in particular having Mach Punch for DD Tar, and Heracross generally has good bulk. It can salvage a lot of offensive teams by taking just that one Hydro Pump for Starmie, for example. But in general, it's damage. The exception, of course, is Hariyama, which is such a unique Pokemon. I love it a lot. I want to make a video just about Hariyama. And that's because of Knockoff and that huge attack stat, which lets it switch into Blissey's Seismic Tosses all day. But it can also go all-out offensive. We've seen a lot of players use it in that vein. Similar to Machamp, and it's a little weaker, but the higher HP stat makes up for it, because it makes it better at switching into Blissey. So, you've got your mix of Cross Chop, Knockoff, Rock Slide, HP Bug, HP Ghost, Focus Punch, whatever. Bulk Up, throw that in there. Yeah, and so you can support the fighters in a lot of ways, but you got your Pursuit, that's a big one, and T-Wave is another big one, and you got to watch out for Dugtrio. Dugtrio is famously a pain. But yeah, the BP Zapdos, of course, is another one. BP Zapdos also likes to run Thunder Wave a lot, so that helps. You have your Salamence check, that's a big one, so you don't just get cleaved open by DD or CB or Mix, or, God forbid, walled by Wish. But yeah, the power is huge, whether you run Choice Band or something else. So, we are 3 generations in. I'm going to take one of my famous bathroom breaks because I was staying particularly well hydrated this morning. So, back in a flash. Today's movie recommendation is the 1981 film Blowout by Brian De Palma, starring John Travolta. And since it might be the best thriller of all time. But while I'm at it, I'm also going to throw in Mute Witness from 1995. A great movie. Very underseen. But I think it's phenomenal. I think it's a lot of fun. It's, yeah, and it reminds me of Blowout, so, yeah. And right under Blowout on my shelf is Thief by Michael Mann, starring James Caan. So I'm going to recommend that as well. You get 3 recommendations today. I guess it's a longer video, so. Alright, we move on to Generation the 4th. Is someone texting me something important? Nope, it's bullshit. So, Gen 4... We've got, we got a lot of stuff here. I forgot to mention in Gen 2 that one of the there is a strong fighting option. It's Dynamic Punch, which is of course 50% accurate, and you don't really want that as a stab. A lot of Pokemon use Dynamic Punch in Gen 2, but it's not for as a fighting stab. It's to try and get past checks like T-Tar and Lax. Those Pokemon being things like Gengar, T-Tar itself. So I was reminded of that because Dynamic Punch gets a boost in Gen 4 when attached to Machamp's No Guard ability, which makes it a big threat. Since it now has that auto-confuse thing, because it doesn't miss, of course nothing can miss against it as well. But it also gets a better move to hit Ghost types with as well, since Payback has double damage both if it goes second and on the Switch, which unfortunately was removed in Generation 5. And it also is able to attack things like flying types with Ice Punch. Well, it also has the improved rock coverage of Stone Edge, which also can't miss thanks to No Guard. And you're thinking, wait, Payback and Ice Punch, those are special attacks. And then you realize, oh no, in Gens 1 through 3, Dark and Ice are special types. For those who don't know, in Gens 1 through 3, whether or not a move is physical is based on its type. And the easiest way to remember it is that the Evolution types are all special. Evolutions plus Dragon are all special. Everything else is physical. So what are the Evolutions? Flareon, Vaporeon, Jolteon, Espeon, Umbreon, Leafeon, Glaceon, right? So those types are all special. So, and Dragon, of course. So yeah, the physical special split is big because it is going to increase the ways that fighting types can hit their checks. No longer are they limited in their hidden power. You know, they don't have to make the choice between Bug and Ghost anymore, nor do they have to run hidden power and mess with their IVs in general, which is great. So yeah, Machamp is a big one. As far as OU goes, and we're not going to see things like Hariyama and Medicham and Blaziken. We are going to see Breloom, which of course gets a big boost in Poison Heal. But we see some Heracross at first. But we're not going to see Brick Break. We're not going to see Focus Punch. And that is because before Advance balanced out the power of its fighting moves. You know, if you want consistency, you got Brick Break. It's strong, but not that strong. If you want huge power, you got Focus Punch. But that's, of course, one of the riskiest moves in the game. And in Gen 4, we introduced Close Combat, which is really strong and really riskless. I mean, forget the defense drops. I mean, these are fast offensive Pokemon without much in the way of bulk. You know, it's not going to make the biggest difference. I mean, yes, okay, there are situations where close combat defense drops are significant. I would never say that there isn't. But it's very worth it for the effective 180 base power move you are giving these fighting types. Absolutely enormous. So Heracross finally has 2 stabs, which are equally strong. And thanks to the physical special split, it can also hit Ghosts even better with things like Night Slash. Or it can even, and Stone Edge obviously, you know, Rock Slide is no longer your anti-flying coverage. You have the much, much better power of Stone Edge. I mean, going from 75 base power to 100 is enormous. And of course, Heracross also has Pursuit, so sometimes it can even remove something like Gengar itself. Yeah, still got those great abilities. Oh, fighting types are also getting buffed because not only did Gen 5 brought, Gen 3 brought Choice Band, but for the fighters, it's bringing Choice Scarf, and suddenly that mediocre speed stat on a lot of fighting types, yeah, well, goodbye. Scarf Hera, I mean, Band Hera is also Terror, but Scarf Hera is suddenly going to... This changes how offensive Pokemon and offensive teams are used, because before it's like, all right, well, my team is not very good defensively, but that's because it's fast and good offensively, so I don't need to really counter something like Heracross. Well, not that you would be able to afford to anyway if you want to run offense, but you're going to naturally beat it just by out-offensing it. And now by slapping Scarves on such strong offensive Pokemon, then suddenly it doesn't matter that your Heatran, actually Heatran is slower, that's a bad example, that your Infernape is faster than Heracross and will beat it with fire moves first because, oh look, the Heracross is Scarf, and actually it's the one threatening you out. So you gotta be really careful with your resistances, otherwise you're just gonna get cleaned up. Before we get to Infernape and Lucario, which form the crux of OU's fighting types, We've also got Breloom, which has a Toxic Orb and Poison Heal, incredible buff, because now it has a ton in the way of longevity. And this physical special split also means that it has Seed Bomb as stab. And Gen 3 also it also added the move Superpower, which is a great move, but it didn't give it to fighting types. It gave it to things like Regirock, or all three of the Regis, and like Nidoqueen, which is like, okay, that's cool, but what about the fighting types? Like, nah, don't worry about it. Yeah, so Superpower is the same strength as close combat, but it weakens attack after use, which is, you know, more significant than the defense drop of CC. But hey, Superpower is still a great move on Breloom. And it's got Seed Bomb, it's got Mach Punch, it can boost with Swords Dance more efficiently, it can Focus Punch. Breloom can do a million things. Actually, Scarf Breloom is actually pretty good as well. It can also improve its coverage against flyers, not necessarily by running Stone Edge, although that is quite good, but also by running Facade, which is 140 base power, so it is going to be strong. Against neutral targets, Facade is going to be stronger than Seed Bomb. So, like, if you were attacking a Psychic type, a neutral Psychic type, like, let's say Mew for some reason, because Mew's being tested in OU or something dumb, and you have your Stab Seed Bomb, but Facade's actually going to hit it harder. Gliscor is a more OU pertinent example, actually. Yeah, Breloom's also really threatening because you can't wear it down passively. I wanted to expand on that longevity part. Because it heals even in sand, so that's really valuable. And with the increased power of all these fighters, then you are less able to truly counter them with your fighting resists. But before we get to their support crew, which is getting better and better, then we also have to mention the other new additions to the fighting type game. Of course, Infernape and Lucario. As far as OU is concerned, those are the big ones. Heracross eventually falls out of favor in OU. I mean, it's still a decent Pokemon, for sure. Especially with the return of Latias. But it's not the easiest to fit. In relation to these other four fighting types that make up OU's fighters, then it's just got the least amount of utility in one way or another. You know, it doesn't have the speed of Infernape or the type coverage, or, you know, Lucario's SDE speed, or, you know, typing, or Machamp's confuse antics, or Breloom's mix of, you know, everything. So still a good Pokemon, especially nice for Guts, Sleep Talk, Choice Band stuff. That's the way to run Hera if you want to do it now. But it's hard to fit, which is why it dropped to UU at the end of the generation and then went BL, because it destroyed the entire tier. Shocker. Yeah, so Infernape, I mean, before, your problem with Blaziken was like, yeah, it's slow. Infernape is one of the fastest Pokemon in the tier. It's crazy fast. You know, faster than it naturally, only going to be Gengar and Starmie. Or Gengar and Latias, obviously. And Starmie. Everything else is going to have to Scarf. And Scarf can be exploited. Infernape is actually quite a good Scarfer itself. But you got that great stab combination, Fire Blast CC, and just the move pool. I mean, you've got Grass Knot for Swampert. You got Stone Edge. You got Thunder Punch. You got two amazing boosting options in Nasty Plot and Swords Dance. And I was saving this one for last. Oh, you've got Priority and Mach Punch and Vacuum Wave, obviously. But you've also got... it can also set up Rocks, but we'll get to Rocks. But the big one is another new move, which is U-Turn, which, I mean... A fighting type with U-Turn, yeah, forget those psychic types switching in, because now you have a move to hit them super effectively and get out of the way and bring in something good against them and force them out again. And so, I mean, that makes pursuing them even easier. Like, oh yeah, Latias and Starmie stuff Infernape, it's like, yeah, and then it uses U-Turn, and then they get hit super effectively into Pursued, and then they die. So, yeah, U-Turn is one of Infernape's best tools. And speaking of Stealth Rock, that's another enormous tool, because before, what was the issue with fighters, right? You thud into Psychics and Ghosts and Flyers. Psychics and Ghosts you can Pursuit, right? But Flyers, not so much. Yeah, well, now there's something called Stealth Rock, which hits Flyers super effectively, so you send in your Gyarados or your Zapdos or your Dragonite to absorb that Infernape CC or U-Turn or Fire Blast, in the case of Gyarados or D-Knight anyway. not Zapdos. So much anyway. And you get U-turned on with Rocks Up, and well, you're in trouble. I mean, even just forget the U-turn in that part. Just having to take super effective Stealth Rock to switch into Infernape in the first place is terrifying. Now, Infernape is obviously not invincible because it's quite frail, which balances out its great coverage and speed and power, but it's the general idea of why it's so much easier to support fighting types. And in Gen 4 is when fighting types' power, not just in and of themselves, but in terms of how easy they were to support, became really apparent. This is where they started taking off, because Pursuit is also better by virtue of the physical special split, because now your Tyranitar is running it off its much better physical attack stat, as well as something like Scizor now being able to run it. So, but it's mostly T-Tar, and when you're running something potentially as strong as Choice Band boosted Pursuit, then you're trapping Ghosts and Psychics, and I mean, obviously you have to be careful around things like Gengar, but things like Gengar, not so good at actually taking the hits. You just got to watch out for coming into that fighting move, which is obviously what it's great at. But there's all sorts of, I mean, you can also go Scarf with your T-Tar or Chople Berry or whatever if you want to pursue that Gengar, which is what's done. Basically, there's a lot of flexibility in supporting fighting types, and it's very easy because you're going to be running rocks anyway, right? And they just naturally pair so well with them that they become more threatening without even trying. It's like, oh, rocks will help my Infernape become more threatening, but I was going to get rocks anyway because it's the best move in the game. And you tend to run Pursuit on a lot of offensive teams because walls like Starmie and Latias, or even something like Clefable, or Blissey before Clefable was popular, is so difficult to deal with otherwise. So it's they're very easy to naturally support. When the checks to these Pokemon are weak to such significant things like Stealth Rock and Pursuit, or in Infernape's case, U-turn. I mean, that's just enormous. It's so easy to get them to generate offense with them. And getting them on the field is easier than ever because of U-turn, not just on Pokemon like Infernape, but other Pokemon like Jirachi and Flygon and Scizor being able to U-turn out of things like Heatran coming in, and oh, whoops, now here's a free switch in for my fighting type. Like, not necessarily just Infernape, but also Lucario. And Lucario can do a lot of things. It became really popular with Scarf over the last few years. But it's bread and butter, well, besides the early days of Generation 4, where people were like, oh, wow, cool, a special fighting type with choice specs, and then they realized Swords Dance was better anyway, because SDE speed is amazing. So, and that typing is just phenomenal. That quadruple rocks weakness, you resist so many types, which is good because, yeah, it's frail, but you're going to resist a choiced move, which is all you need for that one SD, and then that can be game. Especially when that move is like Draco Meteor. It's like -2 Draco Meteor. Yeah, who cares about that? So SDE speed, and the last move, it used to be Crunch. That was really popular. But then over time, people were like, yeah, Bullet Punch will destroy Gengar better than Crunch, or more reliably on average. And Scarf Tyranitar is also a big one. And then people started slotting in things like Ice Punch for Gliscor and bulky Zapdos. As well as against offensive teams, you are more able to instantly threaten Dragonite. So, but yeah, SD Luke can do all sorts of cool things. Luke in general, I mean, Scarf is a great set, but it's mainly that typing, that sand immune, quadruple rocks resistant typing, and you quadruple resist dark as well, and rock, so you resist, you switch into T-Tar quite well, and with Scarf CC, you are a great DD Tar check. You resist opposing E-Speed, so you check things like DD E-Speed Knight or opposing SD Lucario. So, and you can generally take one hit. You can take one Gyarados Waterfall, as long if it's unboosted. But preferably don't switch into it, obviously. But yeah, SD Luke Luke in general is just a fantastic Pokemon. And it's another example of, because previously a lot of fighting types are like bruisers, right? They get an early game, whereas Lucario became the defining end game Pokemon. It's like, oh no, that last Pokemon wound up being Luke. And now I'm in danger of getting swept because SD priority CC with that good speed stat is just a terror. So, yeah, of course you could use Lucario early game if you felt like it. That's the power and flexibility of fighting types is ever increasing. I mean, Infernape was also sometimes used as a late game sweeper if it had a nasty plot. That was more popular than Swords Dance. But that was another example of, oh, special attacking physical, or special attacking fighting type. Although even Nasty Plot Mixape tended to go mixed. It was usually Fire Blast, Close Combat, and then Grass Knot. So even on a Nasty Plot set, you still preferred CC as your stab to instantly eviscerate Blissey. Of course, you can also fix or throw in things like Vacuum Wave. So, but yeah, a lot of flexibility. So that's Gen 4's fighting types, just getting stronger and stronger in and of themselves and with the support you can give them. And then Gen 5 comes up, and Gen 5 doesn't really add much in the way of... oh, I should also mention Gliscor as being relevant because it is not weak to Stealth Rock. It's not even affected by Sandstorm, and it doesn't mind Pursuit, you know, and it resists U-turn. So Gliscor's had such an important place in the tier, and Nidoqueen is actually similarly significant in staving off this fighting type onslaught. Of course, Gliscor has that significant ice type weakness, which can be exploited by something like Machamp or Lucario, or you know, Mixape used to use HP Ice commonly. You know, like this set minus Nasty Plot plus HP Ice, that used to be standard Mixape. But yeah, that's one reason why Heracross, because Heracross is fairly helpless against Gliscor until it gets slept or, you know, statused and just fires off a Bandit Facade. Yeah. But yeah, Gliscor was significant because it avoided those pitfalls that like the Psychics and the Ghosts and the Flyers on average. Because other Flyers that are weak to, or sorry, that avoid the weakness to Stealth Rock and Sandstorm, like Skarmory, they are not neutral to fighting, so they're not really fighting type checks at all. So, whereas if you're fighting and, hey, where'd my fighting types go? Oh, in Gen 4. If you're fighting, or sorry, if you're flying and resistant to fighting, then you are probably going to be vulnerable to one of those common conditions. You know, your Rocks, your Pursuit. Even being weak to U-turn is significant for a teammate of a fighting type, because if you can force that opposing Pokemon, like let's say a Celebi out with a U-turn Pokemon, you're not just forcing it out, you're forcing it out and getting momentum. So, very easy to support fighting types to dangerous levels. Now, we go to Gen 5, and the level of support doesn't really change. You've still got your Sand and your Pursuit and your U-turn, but it's more that Gen 5 went out of its way to make fighting types as scary as possible. So like Infernape and Lucario was actually quite popular in Black and White 1, and Infernape was for a time as well, but for the most part they are getting out of the way, because you got things like Conkeldurr, and then you got Terrakion, which is like perfectly engineered to be the biggest threat in the universe, especially in Black and White 1 when there's no Landorus Therian. You can't intimidate this. It's just going to destroy everything. And even things like Virizion were really popular, but then in Black and White 2, Keldeo became big. Toxicroak for rain teams. That has a lot of amazing qualities. And Breloom gets buffed in that it can run Toxic Orb stuff, yes, but in Black and White 2, it gets Technician, so it's got a boosted Mach Punch, it's got Bullet Seed. It's also, before Sleep was banned, which I have to make a video about, it also had broken Gen 5 Sleep, which resets upon a switch, which is the most ridiculous thing ever. So you can also throw in things like Low Sweep for just destroying Latios, hitting it insanely hard and lowering its speed, and with Rocks up, it's just toast. So Low Sweep is an option. You can, and it was also really good at using gems before those were banned. It was one of the most annoying users of them, actually. Fighting Gem Breloom was absolutely ridiculous. So yeah, Technician, it's absolutely nuts. Conkeldurr was really big early in the generation and then kind of petered out later on. But it was basically Machamp, but superpowered. You got Guts, and then later you get Sheer Force. But it's got such a huge attack stat, an enormous HP stat, and you've got, oh, Drain Punch gets buffed. So it's much stronger and it has better PP, because in Gen 4 it actually sucks. Same with Giga Drain, actually. And Payback gets nerfed, but okay, fine. Just all these qualities were. It was also much more relevant when Excadrill was around and you needed that big Mach Punch to revenge kill it. But Conkeldurr eventually fell by the wayside. Another broken fighting type that we saw early in the generation, it was Blaziken, because that got speed boost. And not only did it get speed boost, but it also was a recipient of a buffed high jump kick, which before you were wondering, hey, why doesn't Medicham use high jump kick in Gen 3? Well, because it was weak and terrible. I forget what the power, I think it's like 85, but it's like nothing. It's not worth using over like Brick Break. Yeah, high jump kick, yeah, 85 with 90 accuracy, and the recoil, no, just not worth it. Whereas in Gen 5, it goes up to stronger than close combat levels, which, yeah, good night. Blaziken is also a beneficiary of Gen 5's permanent sun, and it can just do all these things. And with speed boost, it's just going to run past you anyway, because, yeah, remember that whole thing where you were keeping it in check by virtue of how slow it was in conjunction with its frailty? Well, now you're going to need priority. Oh, and even if you do have something like an Aqua Jet Azumarill, then it's going to get weakened by sun. So yeah, Blaziken was crazy and got banned pretty quick. But other fighters, I mean, Virizion was the Rainstall killer in Gen 1. Or, sorry, in Black and White 1. Before, where is Virizion? It didn't go to UU. Oh no, it did go to UU. Of course it did. Yeah, Virizion, Conk, those were more Black and White 1 guys. But in Black and White 1, Virizion was a big OU threat. And Terrakion was majorly... Terrakion was insanely broken in Black and White 1, because no land OT and just... I mean, even without gems, it would have been nuts, but, you know, just CB close combat. Especially because it's easier than ever to... I guess I said fighting types didn't get more in the way of support in terms of wearing down their checks, which is true technically, but it's also easier than ever to get these fighting types in to do their explosive damage with the addition of Volt Switch. And Volt Turn teams, one of their favorite Pokemon wound up being Terrakion, because Rotom Wash will Volt Switch out of something, and if Scizor isn't going to U-turn out of the next thing and eventually get Terrakion for free, then it's probably because Rotom Wash has already Volt Switched into Terrakion. I mean, even teams that weren't dedicated Volt Turn, they would love pairing Rotom Wash with Terrakion, because Rotom Wash would draw in things that Terrakion shredded. And Terrakion tends to shred a lot of things because it's got that Infernape speed, which is enormous, and just screaming high attack. And of course, what's one of the best coverage options for rock types been so far? For fighting types been so far? Rock, right? Because it hits flying types super effectively, and it also hits psychics and ghosts neutrally. Yeah, so the Quake Edge combination, or the Quake Slide combination previously, I was blanking for a sec. The Quake Slide or Quake Edge combination was also big because it had such good coverage between those two moves that it was very difficult to resist. It was only Pokemon like Claydol that resisted them, or like Nidoqueen. So like rare stuff in an OU context. So yeah, the thing is that you're not going to have Stab on both of them until Terrakion comes around and has Stab Stone Edge and Stab CC, and they complement each other so perfectly. And yeah, Stab CC is so threatening that a lot of people would get hung up on trying to resist it and forget that CC was just as threatening. It's like, oh yeah, my Gliscor will take this CC. Oh right, Stone Edge. Ridiculous, ridiculous Pokemon. And that's just with 2 moves, so you can do so many things in the last 2 slots. And then Keldeo, of course, came around with water fighting being insane coverage and being so fast and being supported by both Pursuit and Rain. Incredibly controversial, so difficult to answer both of its stabs, and it's well documented on this channel. I think it's insanely broken. So yeah, so Gen 5 really upped the ante. Getting these Pokemon in, supporting them has never been easier. Fighting types were, pretty much the only thing that drowned out fighting types. It was kind of like Gen 1, which is funny because Gen 5 was lore-wise kind of a soft reboot of Gen 1. With Conkeldurr being a buff Machamp, for example. And funnily enough, the dominance of Psychic Spam, with Latios, Alakazam, and Reuniclus, that was pretty much the only thing keeping Terrakion from completely shredding everything. Like, even when people were saying Black and White was at its most dragon-infested, Terrakion was like, well, I hope the opponent brings a lot of dragons because I'm going to destroy all of them. So yeah, that was Gen 5, a very fighting-heavy generation. Even Mienshao, actually. Mienshao was very popular in the very first days of OU in Black and White 1. Then it was forgotten. And then in well into Black and White 2, like after the generation, then people realized, hey, this thing's actually really good. It's got that stab high jump kick. It's got Regenerator. It's got U-turn. a great special attack stat for HP Ice to rip through Gliscor and Landorus Therian. It's even got Grass Knot to mess with things like Slowbro and Jellicent. Yeah, great poke. It's got Fake Out to help with Volcarona. It's a great Scarfer. It's got that amazing speed tier over +1 Volcarona and Scarf Garchomp. So yeah, Mienshao, kind of a forgotten threat, because then people started using Protect on Heatran and Excadrill a lot. People were like, oh, Mienshao is useless. But Mienshao is overlooked. It can very easily make those Protect Pokemon rue the day with something like Sub-Baton Pass. So I'm a big fan of Mienshao. I think it's great. So another big threat. And UU is also extremely fighter heavy, with Heracross being one of the biggest threats in the tier. So we move on to Gen 6. Breloom continues to be a threat with Technician stuff. Terrakion, not so much, because now the big change in Gen 6 is that there are Fairy types. So you are no longer just stuck with the flawed Fairy, or sorry, Flying, Psychic, or Ghost, where one of them is weak to rocks, or Psychic and Ghost being weak to Pursuit. No, Fairy is neutral to rocks, and it is resistant to Pursuit. And what's more, Sand is no longer permanent, so you can't even wear him down that way. So that, of course, is a double-edged sword, because it also means Specs Keldeo is not getting worn down by Sand every turn. Specs Keldeo, of course, becomes one of the biggest threats in the tier. But fighting types remain insanely threatening, of course. Specs Keldeo is huge. Breloom finds a way to be threatening. Terrakion was always slept on, but sometimes people would remember, hey, this thing is actually kind of scary with a Choice Band. And other fighting types are, of course, things like Megas, like Mega Medicham being one of the purest examples of a new generation KO button. Like, you got that high jump kick off of pure power, whatever. This... You know, what's that final attack at? 636? 636? No, 646, right? No, 656. Of course, I'm stupid. I was saying, that feels high but low at the same time. Yeah, you got Medicham just killing everything with high jump kick, doing insane stuff. And, of course, being easy to support. So now fighting types are... yes, they're struggling more because of Fairy types, but they're also stronger than ever before. Stronger and faster, because Medicham is just breaking world records in terms of power. Because, yeah, Mega Mawile was a little stronger because it's got a higher attack stat alongside pure power, but Mega Medicham's high jump kick is a much stronger stab option than Mawile's Play Rough. So, and it's also got that great secondary stab of Zen Headbutt. So, yeah, you can have a Fairy type like Clefable, but it's also going to get cleaved open by Zen. So fighting types are getting stronger and easier to support over the years, and Zen Headbutt is so strong that you don't even necessarily need coverage for things like Gliscor, because previously you would love to run things like Ice Punch on your fighting type, right? But with Medicham, you don't really need it because Zen Headbutt hits that so hard. You would rather focus on slapping on things like Fake Out, Bullet Punch, that combo for maximum priority. Or you can even run Thunder Punch to run Slowbro, to ruin Slowbro, which is theoretically one of the only things that can actually answer Medicham because it's just so busted. So Medicham can do a lot. So it's getting stronger and also getting faster, as seen in the case of Mega Lopunny, which also has Scrappy, which means you can't even resist it with Ghost types, besides Cofagrigus, because it has Mummy, which changes your ability. But you get to hit it once on the Switch, and people don't think of Lopunny as super strong, at least in terms of a Mega, because it's quote-unquote only got 136 base attack, but I mean, that's still enormous, especially if it goes Adamant, which it can often afford to. But even if it can, I mean, that attack stat is great alongside a high-powered stab return, and of course, stab high jump kick, which is just insanely good. And then that last slot, you got Quick Attack, you got Heal Bell, you got Encore, Mega Lopunny, you got Ice Punch. Mega Lopunny can do so many great things. And it's really pushing the boundaries of what fighting types were before, because before, if you wanted to use a fast fighting type, you had to Scarf it, and now one of the fastest Pokemon in the game is a fighting type, and that really helps a strong fighting type at that. So you can more easily revenge kill things like Manaphy and Keldeo with something as strong as a high jump kick, which would otherwise be difficult to find a combination of something at least neutral that was both faster and able to hit them so hard. So that's why Mega Lopunny is a really big deal. And of course, for extreme overkill, you've got Mega Heracross, which can SD and hit a... There's Mega Heracross isn't in UU, is it? No way. I know Heracross is, but not Mega Heracross. Okay, yeah, I'm just not finding it. Is it in OU technically? I didn't know that. Why am I not finding Mega Heracross? Oh, is it? Oh, OU by technicality. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, where you've got CC and Skill Link Pin Missile and SD to get an attack stat over 1,000 in a single turn. Not that you really need it because it hits so hard right off the bat. And you don't have the high jump kick issue of thudding into protect and struggling against things you should be threatening out easily like Heatran. 515 attack. Jesus. Yeah, and you got the best... one of the best options for anti-fighting coverage, because you can throw in a well, first of all, you don't want to run psychic types into Heracross in general because it's got stat bug. That's one of the best things about Hera over the generations. But also with Mega, you've got Skill Link Rock Blast, which hits harder than Stone Edge and with better accuracy, because 25, 50, 75, 100, 125. So yeah. And you have your nice little crit chance with that. I mean, it's a little slower, but it's also really, really bulked out. So Mega Hera, good Pokemon, a little underappreciated. So it's more on the slower side, but fighting types over the generations, they start surpassing that speed problem more and more. Even Breloom, with Technician Mach Punch, it's not necessarily just as simple as outspeed it anymore. You can't just throw a Heatran in front of it, for example. So... yeah, you've got more and more... I mean, this is not just exclusive to fighting types, but it's especially notable on fighting types, how they're getting stronger and faster and craftier even in the ways they can mess with their opponents. Like with Lopunny running Encore and ruining a Clefable locked into Soft Boiled or something. Or even like Power Up Punch, which boosts his attack and attacks at the same time. So... yeah, fighter. I think those are all the fighters I wanted to mention in Gen 6. Yeah. Yeah. And of course, it's easier than ever to support them with Pursuit because you also got Weavile helping you out. So, I mean, yeah, fighting type counters are getting better with like Slowbro, and Gliscor is as strong as ever, but yeah. Gen 7, you got the Megas, of course. Keldeo goes down because of Toxapex. And yeah, if you want to be a fighting type, you got to deal with Toxapex, which is, of course, not fun, but you've also got some cool new fighters. You got... Hawlucha wasn't very good in Gen 6, but in Gen 7 with Terrain, it's a major threat. Great on Hyper Offense. That's a big one. It's because it's strong and fast and not stopped by a lot of physical walls. That's a big one because that Flying Stab means it's cleaving through Landorus and Gliscor and Tangrowth. And most Landorus can't even hit it. You know, the same with those others, actually. So, Hawlucha is a big one. Tougher to fit, but a big one nonetheless. And Como-O is really cool because it's not... It is a great offensive threat, but it's also really big in that it can be a great defensive Pokemon, which is rare for a fighting type. So, I mean, yeah, you can do crazy stuff like DD and... the Z move one with Clanging Scales into Clangorous Soul Blaze, that's what it's called. And CC, and it's got all the coverage you could ever want. But that typing is really cool. That bulk is great. It's got rocks, so you can run a bunch of really cool things with that. And that's why I really like Como-O. I think it's a fantastic Pokemon. Very consistent. You know, you resist both Greninja's stabs, so you're great against Ash. Protect, Toxic... I like Dragon Tail on it, so Gliscor can't set up on it, but just you can do so many things with Como-O. It's really, really cool. Yeah, so, and I like that. It's a bulkier fighting type, but it's still very much a major offensive threat. That can, you know, because it's not super fast or super strong. Those stats are more well-rounded, but being more well-rounded is what makes it as threatening as it is, because you can't just poke it with a light breeze and knock it over. So, those are the other significant fighting types in Gen 7, I think. I'm because you don't really see a lot of Breloom. And I don't think I'm forgetting much. But yeah, it's mostly stuff like you see Heracross, like in grassy terrain, it's particularly terrifying. You know, supporting, like, everything that supports offense tends to be very well utilized by fighting types. So like Z moves on Como, or like the terrains, like electric terrain Medicham is just absurd. Or sorry, a psychic terrain, obviously, with Zen Headbutt just being one of the most obscene moves ever. And, you know, have fun switching in your steels or your dark types into psychic terrain boosted Zen Headbutts and getting high jump kicked in the face. So unless you got a Mega Sableye, that's it. So yeah, and of course you still got your rocks and pursuit and all that stuff. So I think that's pretty much it. And then in Gen 8 you go to some real extremes with things like Urshifu, not just the dark one, but because the water one's pretty crazy from what I can tell as well, because it's got U-turn. Like, let's look at both of them. Where's the banned one? Not GMAT. Yeah, just regular. Yeah, I mean, this one was significant because in Gen 6, Steel no longer resisted Dark. So now fighting Dark becomes an unresistible stab combination. Which is... yeah, or not unresistible, because they already have amazing coverage together. Because they both are resisted by Fairy. But so it's not about resisting both of them at the same time with Steel. It's more that it's really hard to resist Dark in general when you can't throw a Steel into it. Especially with the fact that Wicked Blow auto crits, so you can't intimidate it or anything. So this thing is just absolutely nuts because it's actually got really nice physical bulk. You got CC, Wicked Blow, and then other stuff like Sucker Punch and U-turn and Bulk Up. And I remember this thing being around. It was so stupid, and it's so strong. It's got a good speed tier, a really solid speed tier for something this strong. Absolutely nuts. So yeah, Urshifu was crazy broken, but even the water one is kind of crazy. Because, you can't even protect against it? That was absolutely nuts. So it has no downsides to being CB insofar as being scouted. And its moves hit so hard that just resisting them isn't enough. Which is kind of a trademark of a fighting type anyway, but this one took it way too far. But yeah, this one's got the water fighting coverage of Keldeo, but also with U-turn and amazing priority in Aqua Jet. And Surging Strikes, I think, yeah, a multi-hit crit move, so it's crazy strong. In addition to CC, what a Pokemon. This thing gets spammed all the time and for good reason. So, yeah, especially with the super effective U-turn for Psychics, increasing its super effective coverage in general, not just facilitating its offensive coverage better. And of course, letting it maintain momentum as well. But yeah, forget switching your Slow Twin comfortably into this fighting water combo. So yeah, fighters just get stronger and better and nastier over time. And you've even got things like Buzzwole and... Gen 7 also had Pheromosa. I remember when people said that was balanced. That was funny. Yeah, Pheromosa was kind of crazy, because... and then it was banned in Gen 7 as well. But I remember when that was around, and you just... I mean, talk about getting faster and stronger. I mean, you get this fast and this strong on both sides of the spectrum with that move pool, you know, Quiver Dance and Ice Beam. Forget HP Ice. Ice Beam. Yeah. At least Gen 8 saw Blaziken come back to OU, and it was still really good, so that was cool. Yeah, so I am talked out at this point. We have gone over a lot of fighting type stuff. So, as a Galarian Zapdos, that was really cool. When that was in OU, just spamming its Defiant, Brave Bird, CC combo stuff. Forget, you know, a fighting type with Defiant, so you can't switch Landorus T into it, because it's just going to make it stronger. I think that's just so cool. Anyway, and you also punish Defog, obviously. Great stuff. So, very cool poke. And you got that awesome fighting flying combo. Pulled it off better than Hawlucha, I think. Cooler, anyway. So, yeah, what's Gen 9 doing so far? I have, in terms of fighting types, you got... Great Tusk, obviously. Yeah, now Great Tusk is a whole new level of fighting type support. You got... Because it's so great offensively and defensively, and you got Rocks and Spin. What a Pokemon. But yeah, I think it's the most popular fighting type by far, but I don't think Quaquaval's been seeing too much use. And oh, Breloom gets CC now, which is obviously a huge upgrade. But of course, the thing is that anything can become a fighting type if it terastallizes, so that's fun. And yeah, I think we're gonna leave it there. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this was enjoyable for you, and I will see you in the next one.